Well, good day to you. It is March the 9th. I hope you're having a fabulous day wherever you are. My name is Gary Willing. I want to welcome everyone to Search for Signs. And as I always like to do, just take a brief moment to just kind of let people know who are hearing this for the first time that if you want to know more about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, if you want some really good background information, check out the link at the very top of all those lists of links in my description portion. It's the Share International site. You can get really good background information about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom there, better than you can with the other sites. Now, it doesn't mean that those other sites aren't kind of entertaining too to look at and might give you some, broaden your horizons a little bit, because they talk about this information in some way. That's why I always encourage you to check them out. But they're all free and they're there for you whenever you want to look into it. So hopefully at some point you'll at least check out the Share International site. Now, if you want to join the discussion, let me know what you think. Post a comment. You can also email me at searchforsigns@mail.com, and it always makes me chuckle when people ask me what my email is, because I say it at the beginning of every video. So anyway, searchforsigns@mail.com. It's actually even written in the description portion too. And I invite anybody, if you want to email me and let me know what you have any questions, you want to talk about this in private and not through video, you can do that too. But if you have a question and you don't mind me trying to answer it in public, post your question in the comments section and I'll look at trying to answer it in the next video. All right. And again, everybody that commented and asked a question since the last time I put a video up, I really want to thank you as well for doing that. Now, I did have a question, and it is coming from a gentleman named Mark. Could you speak a bit about how one would be able to identify a master? Now, Mark, I have to say this. It's a wonderful question, but it's also wonderfully difficult for me to try to answer because I am not an authority on how to do that. Okay, now, I want to just be transparent here. I didn't always get it right when I would ask Ben. Okay, so there were times that I thought for sure it was Maitreya or one of these masters. Asked him, and he said no. And he had no problem saying no. Okay, he didn't make a thing about it. He didn't beat you over the head about it, but he was pretty matter of fact. No, that wasn't one of the masters. So it wasn't every single time that I asked him, oh yeah, that was a master. Oh yeah, that was a master. Oh yeah, that was a master. It was just the times that it was, he said yes, and the times that it wasn't, he said no. Now, he was extraordinary because he had a connection with one of these masters, a telepathic connection. So all you had to do was ask his master for confirmation. I'm sure he had a pretty good idea whether that was Maitreya or not, or this master or not, because he could tell, he'd done it for so many years that he could tell, but he would always ask his master for confirmation. And his master would say, yes, no, maybe so, right? So, but the other thing too would happen is, and it happened a couple times, when I was just talking about something with him, and he mentioned that it was a master or Maitreya, and I was not thinking it was a master or Maitreya, actually. So, so I got it wrong both ways, and I had talked about it in a previous video about these insects. And the story goes like this. I used to smash bugs when I was a kid. So much so that my dad used to call me the bad masher. That was one of his nicknames for me. And when I started taking bass lessons, I took bass lessons from this gentleman named Robert, who was an extraordinarily loving man. And one of the first few lessons that I had with him, he was showing me something on the bass, and he looked up toward the wall, and I kind of looked over to see what he was looking at, and he was looking at a moth. And he said, excuse me for 1 second. He puts his guitar down and he goes over there, and I thought for sure he was getting ready to smash this thing too. Why not? Right? Anyway, but no, what did Robert do? He cupped this poor thing in his hand, and he opened up the front door and he let it out. And I was like, well, that's something I don't normally see, right? I've never done that before in my life, right? And I think I might have even said something to that effect, that I have no problem killing insects, right? Anyway, so a few years after this, before I knew anything about these masters, so I wasn't thinking about this or thinking that one of these masters would do this for me. It was just an interesting experience that happened to me. And I'm sitting at a dinner party. It was actually a friend of mine's son's birthday. And I had just eaten the birthday cake. And I put the plate with the empty plate with the no cake, because it was good cake. and a plastic fork. I set it on the floor, and I'm sitting there kind of by myself. Everyone else is kind of talking around. I'm sitting on the couch, and I look up, and there's a moth on the ceiling. And I remember back to this experience that I had with Robert, and I don't even know why I said this. I don't normally try to talk to insects like this, but anyway, I thought to myself, I was like, moth, if you can hear me, if you want to get out, land somewhere, and I'll let you out. And I thought maybe if there was an outside chance that it would listen to me or hear me like this, that it'd land on a table or something like this. No, it landed right on my knee. And I was like, well, that's a sign. So I cupped it just like Robert did, and I opened up the door and let it out. And then I went and sat back down. Nobody noticed that I did this. And then this plate sitting on the floor. This is where the empty cake plate comes into the story. A roach comes out from underneath the couch and walks, just brazen, right in front of me, walks right over and steps on the plate and stays on the plate. Now, a roach, when I was a kid, was enemy number one. They were the first ones to get smashed. Anyway, so I look and I was like, well, I'm trying to turn a leaf here, so turn over a leaf. So maybe I should let it out too, right? So I open up the door and I take the plate with me and I kind of flick it out, right? And I remember Jimmy this time looks at me and goes, what are you doing? I said, don't worry about it, man. And I went back and sat on the couch. And a few minutes later, a fly landed on me. And it didn't, and I'd move my knee and it wouldn't move. And I even kind of put my hand over by it and it walked up onto my hand. I was like, this is weird, right? And I opened up the door and I let it out too. And that was the last of them. I don't think there was any other bugs that did this. So I'm saying this story to say how I found out it was one of the masters that did this, Ben was talking about something else to me in private about animals or something. I can't remember exactly how the conversation got started. And there was a pause after he had said what he said. And I said, I had this thing happen to me where this moth landed on my knee, I went through this whole thing, right? And he goes, the Master Jesus did that. And I'm like, he did? And he goes, yeah, he was trying to teach you compassion or harmlessness. I was like, wow. But I had never thought about it. Had he never said anything to me, I would have never known and never even thought that it was anything. So there, I have it on both sides. So sometimes I thought it was Maitreya and I got it wrong. Other times I didn't recognize it and he said it was. And Ben said most people have experiences with these masters and never even think that it's them because they don't introduce themselves in that way. That's why I know that people have seen them on TV and haven't recognized them because they can slip within the shadows kind of deal and go right past you and you don't even know, and yet have an impact on your life in that way. Now, the times that I saw Maitreya, and if you read if you go to the Share International site and you read some of the letters, and I would recommend doing this if you're interested in this, and you can read some of the letters that people wrote into Ben over the years about their own personal experiences. They had kind of the same kind of experience, okay? So for one thing, the masters and Maitreya never boost anybody's ego. Never told you how special you were, what kind of special service you'll offer to humanity, nothing like that. And the teachings that they gave me or other people were always general enough to share with other people and impact them. So there's been experiences that other people have had that I've read in the Share International magazine that have changed my life, and I wasn't there. Does that make sense? So I would say it would be something along those lines. Now, the times that I saw Maitreya, he didn't boost my ego, but I noticed that my heart opened up. And I felt all love of humanity while he was around me and for hours, sometimes even maybe a few days afterwards. I just felt like I was in love with all of life, all of humanity at the same time. But looking back on it, I also realized that he didn't do that. It wasn't his love that was doing that. It was my own love within me. He opened up my heart. Does that make sense? And other people have had that same kind of experience. So I would say it would be something along those lines. But again, never boosting somebody's ego, but yet giving a teaching in a way that's kind of generic that you can share. So for instance, there was a person that I knew. She was from Dallas, and she sat next to the Master Jesus on a plane, flying from Dallas to San Francisco to the conference to see Ben. And it ended up being the Master Jesus. And one of the things that the Master Jesus said to her, I've tried to apply to my life, and it's changed my life. So what he said, she was complaining about George W. Bush and how stupid he was and how damaging he was to world peace and to the world as a whole. And he looks at her and he goes, just visualize love around him. And she goes, love? I should visualize wisdom around him because he's so stupid. That's what she said to him. And he goes, it is the love wisdom ray, is what he said. But he said it's easier for people to change when they're surrounded by love, is what he said to her. Very generic, but yet meaningful, changed her life, I'm sure. But just her relaying that story to me changed my life. The other experience that also is very meaningful to me, that I didn't happen to me personally, happened to Ben's daughter, Tara. And she was walking through Hyde Park, I think, in London. And Maitreya appeared to her as an old man. And she was going through a difficult breakup, I think, with her boyfriend or something like that. And he just struck up this conversation and he asked her, he goes, do you mind if I walk with you for a bit? She said, sure. And I don't know how, she was never, I don't think, really active with this, with the Share International group, so I don't know how much she necessarily believed all this stuff, but this was just an experience that she had with Maitreya. It was quite extraordinary. But, he was talking to her and, he didn't psychoanalyze her. He didn't ask her why she was down. He was just talking to her. But he said, everything has its opposites. First he goes, everything's made of energy, and all that energy has its opposites. So just because you're having a bad year this year, who's to say next year won't be the best year of your life? And he said that's why suicide's such a bad option, because you'll miss out on that experience of awful to great. You know what I mean? And he said something about relationships. He said that's the reason why you can be so in love with somebody one year and then the next year you just are like, they're not so great, fine, and wonderful, right? He goes, because that energy is, it's different. It has its opposites. So that's experience that happened to her by reading it in the Share International magazine changed my attitude toward life. Do you see what I'm saying? So again, that would be one way that you could tell if it was coming from one of these masters. It's never really personal to them personally. It's a teaching that they could apply to themselves if they so chose, but it's not personal to them. And then the other thing too would be if somebody claims to channel one of these masters, or somebody comes into you, and you just bump into somebody on the street, or you're sitting in, next to them at the bus station or the train station, and they claim to be a master, they're not a master. These masters never claim to be masters or special, just like they don't boost your ego to make you feel special. So that would be an indication that it's not. If you had your own personal experience where it's like a dream experience or something to that effect, or some kind of mystical experience that makes you feel special or unique, then that's not coming from one of the masters, for sure. But a person can believe what I'm saying or not. It's up to you, right? But Ben said that there were millions of people who have had experiences with these masters. Most of them had no idea. And eventually, I'm sure we'll remember these experiences or relay it to one of the masters when Maitreya is out known for who he is, and these masters are known one by one. They'll start to remember it and recall it, but they don't remember it now per se, or see it as anything special or anything kind of, a unique experience, I guess. The other thing too I was going to say about this is that the years that I read Share International magazine, it always seemed like Maitreya and the Master Jesus were the two most active in terms of people writing in letters. It always seemed to either be one or the other. There were other masters too, but not as often as those two. The one that came in third was the master from Tokyo. Seemed to be very active to the Japanese groups, whether it was in Tokyo or in Osaka or one of the other cities or whatever. Typically when Ben gave a lecture in Japan, Maitreya, the Master Jesus, and this master from Tokyo were in the audience. They never stood up and said, he never introduced them as one of these masters. They were just amongst the people, And if you go to the Share National site, you can actually see images of some of the familiars that Maitreya had used, whether it was a man or a woman or whatever. But this master in Tokyo said something that I've thought about a lot since I read this story, and that's why it's advisable to read these stories because this is some of the teachings. They're getting some of the teachings that they will be giving humanity out through ordinary people such as myself. Like I said, these stories are quite extraordinary, but this person in Japan wrote this story that they were at a lecture with Ben. In the lobby was the master who was from Tokyo, and he was talking about the environment. And he put it like this, if I remember how he put it, but he was talking about coffee. If you had a cup of coffee and you threw it down the drain, it takes I can't remember how many cubits of water, but 100 cubits of water or gallons of water just to purify that one cup of coffee. I mean, it's really time consuming and takes a lot of energy to purify the water that we drink. Nature does it automatically. It's easy for nature to do it, right? And then he said, if you take that cup of coffee and you drink it, it turns into a tiny amount of urine. Now, he might have said some other things in this discussion with this person, but I think what he was talking about was how nature can purify itself rather easily. And then some years after that, there was the Deepwater Horizon disaster, if you remember that whole epic problem that happened in the Gulf of Mexico, where an oil rig exploded, right? And there was oil just gushing from the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. And they showed satellite photos of it. I mean, the oil filled up almost the whole Gulf. And there were marine biologists and scientists and politicians that thought that was going to be the end of life in the Gulf of Mexico. It was going to kill everything, but it didn't. And once the companies were able to plug up the leak, within a few months, there was no evidence of the oil disaster at all. It was gone. All the wildlife came back, everything like this. And it was really a testament to nature, right? So when humanity finally comes to its senses and realizes that we are harming the environment in the way that we're doing, we'll be able to ask Maitreya, what do we need to do? And a lot of it, I think, will be just to step out of the way and not continue to do this and that and the other, right? It's not that we have to change our life drastically, perhaps, but perhaps live it a little differently, right? And if you remember, right when the lockdowns happened in 2020, it didn't take long for the air to clean itself, right? I think when we finally shut down all the nuclear reactors, which is one of the biggest priorities that one of the first priorities that Maitreya is going to tell humanity that we need to do, to shut down all the nuclear reactors because of all the nuclear pollution that's killing all of life off, including humanity. We'll probably notice within a few weeks how we'll all just feel more vitalized. I ask people all the time, how you doing? And I would say probably 8 out of 10 times, the person always says, I'm tired. Now, a lot of that's stress and a lot of that's just the problems in our life, but a lot of it is the pollution that we're having to deal with on a day-to-day basis, So what would it be like if we didn't have that pollution, right? But I think this master, when he was talking to this person in Japan, was saying it's going to be very easy for nature itself to clean itself. We just have to stop doing what we're doing. Does that make sense? And then it'll be fine. And it won't take much energy. It won't take much effort on humanity to do anything. We just have to stop. We just have to, plug up the hole, so to speak, of the oil gushing into the Gulf of Mexico, figuratively speaking. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you had an experience like that, where they're talking to you about something general, and it's simple, but it's truthful, and it kind of seems wise, then it might have been, I guess. Hopefully that answers your question. But I will say this again. I've mentioned this before on this channel when people have asked about the masters and master experiences, is I'm not alone. Okay, I know that for a fact. I'm not claiming to be unique in having experiences with Maitreya. And I would say millions of people have had experiences with these masters, just as Ben was talking about. And if you have a general interest in this information, more than likely you've met Maitreya at some point in your life, or the Master Jesus, or whatever, and just didn't remember them, right? Whether you're for or against this information, because just because somebody's against this information in 2024 doesn't mean that after Maitreya comes out, they don't go, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? And change their tune in a way, right? So they might have also had an experience with Maitreya, but yet their reaction to it is differently than somebody else's, I guess. Does that make sense? So I would say that if you're listening to this information and you perhaps ask a question or two, and you come back in a few months later and you ask another question or two, more than likely you probably have. I'm not saying that it's a definite thing, but more than likely, whether it's the experience that someone's, perhaps you're thinking about or not or whatever, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But, it's happened. And the other thing, too, I was going to say before I end this discussion is in the late 90s, during one of Ben's lectures, he mentioned a Times Magazine article. And there was an article that said that I think it was like 75% of Americans think that they believe in angels or something to that. It was a staggering percentage of people. And it wasn't that they believe in angels, believe that they've actually had experiences with angels, whether they were helped or saved or healed by an angel. And they wrote, and there was this whole Times article talking about this. He said that the vast majority of the people that were polled had actually had experiences with one of these masters. Because anytime somebody believes that they've had an experience with an angel, it's always one of these masters. And they have appeared to people as winged angels before. It has to do with the law of recognition. I've never seen them with a winged, as a winged angel, but I'm not looking for them in that way. But people who have been healed in those ways, these masters heal people all the time, save people from accidents all the time, myself included, right? One of the funny stories that Ben talked about when he was working with his master, his master was talking about something to him, and all of a sudden he said, "Hold on for 1 second." And then he came back, and Ben asked him what happened, and he goes, "Oh, I just saved this person from, they didn't look to the left when they were trying to cross the street, and they almost got hit by a car, and he pushed them back." So anyway, but they save people all the time. They heal people all the time, and they comfort people when they're dying all the time. And so, but they are the angels that we look to. They are the angels that people talk about. They are the angels in the Bible that interacted with the biblical historical figures of the time and so forth. They were the masters, But anyway, I love you guys. Thank you very much for the question mark. You gave us something to talk about, and I look forward to putting up videos in the future. You guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Take care. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.